listening to the Encouraging Faith podcast, doing ministry together across generational gaps.
Hey, I'm Pastor Doug Munton, and this is the Encouraging Faith podcast, and we are glad you're here. I'm with my man Mariano. Mariano,
What's up?
What do you want people to know about you, Mariano?
Oh, well, I love my wife. I got a shirt on.
You got a Trinity T-shirt. That is
funny
a little
Christmas gift.
Who got it for you?
So it was a joke. She had made a joke about it, but then I bought it as a joke and then wore it, and she thought it was funny.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Mariano is our student pastor here we're at First Baptist Church in O'Fallon, Illinois. We actually had today some of the administrative staff from First Baptist Church of O'Fallon, Missouri came over. We're both in the suburbs of St. Louis, two towns with the same name. I asked the ladies there, I said, I want you to change your name, the name of your town from O'Fallon, Missouri, because we're O'Fallon, Illinois, and it's confusing.
Yeah.
So I said, change your name to Oh My, or something like that, you know.
My.
Yeah. Oh, really? Something like that instead of O'Fallon, and then we wouldn't have that confusion. Well, Mariano and I so I'm the senior pastor. Mariano is our student pastor. And so we're going to talk today a little bit about building strong relationships between lead pastors and student pastors and why that matters, and maybe a little what that would look like, because it's kind of an important one, isn't it? Do you think it's an important one, Mariano?
I think it's very important.
I'm glad you said yes, because this would have been a short podcast if you said no. So, yeah. So why? Why do you think? Why do you think it matters? I'll tell you why I think it matters.
So I mean, we see community in the Bible that we're supposed to learn from those younger than us and older than us. And unfortunately, I think when I meet with a lot of student pastor friends, they're struggling where I think they do want a relationship with their lead pastor. They want to learn and grow, but they might not have it. And then on the other end, I've got guys that maybe think they know it all and don't really pursue a relationship with their lead pastor.
Really?
Maybe because they want to move to something else. But we need it. We need to grow together, learn together, see why we do things the way we do, and be challenged.
Yeah, you gave me this statistic about 85% of pastors. You said, no, you didn't say it. It's from Barna. 85% of pastors believe church health depends on alignment across staff roles, yet only 53% report having consistent, meaningful communication with other staff members.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard sometimes in a church. So some of you are maybe in a role where you're, I don't know, maybe bivocational or something like that too. And it doesn't matter whether, I mean, that relationship between the student ministry and the rest of the church, it's like, for a lot of churches, like it's two completely separate things.
Yeah.
And that strikes me as odd and unnecessary and really even harmful to the church.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you hear me say all the time, Mariano, of how, so our church is multi-generational. And I really think there's a sense in which we ought to, like, maybe you're in a church right now that's kind of one generation. Maybe it's all young, all old or something, older folks. If you're in an area that has multi-generational, I mean, you know, people of every generation.
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't you want to reach is there, are you saying, would you say in a church, I don't want to reach young people, you know, or I don't want to reach older people, or I don't want to reach middle-aged people? Like, does the gospel doesn't apply to them? I mean, I get that there are some people that you can reach, maybe you really reach them easily, that sort of thing. But I mean, we want to reach everyone with the gospel.
For sure.
So the relationship between the student ministry and the rest of the church
matters. It matters. So I've seen you do a few things, but I'm curious what you would do, or what you'd say you do. But how do you, working with the church, we have our kids ministry, young adult ministry, student ministry, how are you working to be intentional and consistent communicating with those other ministries?
Oh, you know, we have some things that probably you just kind of have to do in a larger church. So we have meetings. Now, I'll just tell you, I'm not a big meetings guy.
Yeah.
I really get tired, but I want to we need them. And if you'll make meaningful meetings, then it's helpful. So we have meetings. You know, we have every week we're going to have a staff meeting, and we're going to talk about things, coordinate calendars, make sure we're aware of what's coming up. By the way, isn't it interesting, Mariano, how often are those things, like we're kind of, oh yeah, I forgot about that. I didn't realize that was coming up. I mean, it just happens.
Yeah,
There's a lot
going on.
There's a lot going on
Yeah.
all the time, and so meetings matter. And then the informal meetings where you just talk to the other folks on staff. That's really been helpful too. So we need some formal meetings, where we know for us we're going to meet at this time every week. We're going to meet at that same time.
Yeah.
And we need those informal meetings where we, just connect, talk, find out, build the relationship a little bit more, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one thing that I see you do with me and with other staff members is you'll walk by and just peek in our office and say, how are you doing? And it's not a moment of like, there's these things I need you to do, but it's really just to check up on and see how the ministry is doing, or even ourselves personally. I think you do a good job of going to each of the offices and ministries and checking up on them, and you're not just in the corner.
Yeah, if I get a little bored about something, and it's not that I'm bored in ministry, but sometimes you just get, like, you can't, there's only so much commentary reading you can do in a straight. So sometimes I just say, all right, I need to get away from the commentary or whatever it is and do something else. And so I'll just go walk over to try to hang out with somebody for a while. I kind of like hanging out is that a spiritual gift? The spiritual gift of hanging out?
Yeah, it makes an impact.
Well, it's if I like that. I kind of enjoy that a little bit, and I think it's healthy for our relationship a little bit, and all the staff. And I also, I find out things that way too. So I don't know. Yeah. It helps us kind of align the vision a little bit, so that we're all going the same way. And it just reminds you, we both know this, but I think, and I suppose everyone who hears this knows this, but the church is the church. It's not like part of the church isn't the church. It's the church is the church.
Yeah.
Man, I am a genius when I say stuff like that, Mariano. But I'm just saying, like, we don't want to forget that my part, like maybe I have a primary responsibility in worship or students or children or whatever it would be, but I'm a part of the bigger body. And I want to make sure I'm thinking that way. I think the senior pastors, like it's a responsibility for a pastor who's got other folks that work in that staff. They really ought to see the big picture well. But I think it's really beneficial for the staff to think that way too, as opposed to getting siloed and just you see your little segment of the church and nothing else. And it can happen easily. What keeps you from just like if you wanted to, you could just do student ministry and never think about the church as a whole. What keeps you? What helps you to think about the church as a whole, do you think?
Yeah, I think, seeing the big picture, like you mentioned, seeing the vision, knowing why we do what we do, like First Baptist O'Fallon, we've got our own church values, and so we want to be outward focused. We want to be a small group. How do we word it? We're small group oriented. So I know different things about our church that we're emphasizing as things that we want to do. So when I'm thinking through student ministry, my vision or my values should align with my pastors.
So we say sometimes here, talk about how much Sunday morning matters, and if we let Sunday morning fail, all the other things ultimately would fail. And if you're, so we have a big Sunday night student ministry. I love it. Lots of students come. But if you don't emphasize Sunday morning, then we're less likely to reach the whole family. Well, it's a great benefit when we reach that whole family and not just the student. And if Sunday morning doesn't go well, eventually Sunday night won't. No matter how great it is, eventually, we need Sunday morning. And Sunday morning is everyone. That's all the ages and stages of life. So, So, all right, ready for the next question?
Sure.
What are some practical ways student pastors can ensure they're aligned with the lead pastor's vision for the church?
Yeah, so I think first is knowing it. Knowing what we want to do. So like you mentioned, and I mentioned, we care Sunday morning matters the most. We want to reach all the family. We want to reach the parents, the students, the kids. And so I need to know the vision. And then as I'm planning things, or when I think of some new event or different things, what's the reason I'm doing it? And if it's not going to point people back to Sunday, or if it's not going to help grow and align with our church's vision, then it's probably not something worth doing.
So is that, since you started here, how long have you been on staff now?
On staff, I think I'm going on 4 years.
Good night. So what's changed? Like, how do you see the student ministry differently now than you did when you started?
Yeah, when I first started, I think a lot of it I thought, hey, this is a Sunday night thing, and
Really?
we're gathering students.
You were the associate then.
Yeah, so at the time I was doing
ministry,
more of junior high. Even before that, I was resident, is what they called me at first.
Yes,
yeah.
you were a resident.
And so
That's right.
obviously at that point I'm just coming into something I had never done, and so Sunday night looked like it was something that was our most important.
You didn't think about Sunday morning that much
not as
then.
much. And then as I've learned, working with you, and when God brought me into the student pastor role, I realized, wait, Pastor Doug is emphasizing Sunday morning a lot more. And so I got to hear your vision, and then I've heard other guys say that they catch on to the vision, so I caught on to the vision. And then as I applied that, changed things, raised expectations for leaders, I began to understand why Sunday morning was important.
Why do you think that? So, like, what about? So that's changed in your thinking. Now
Yeah,
you realize
for sure.
Sunday morning matters most. Sunday night hasn't fallen apart, has it?
Not at all.
In fact, just the opposite.
In fact, it's grown.
Yeah, absolutely. So why? What do you think? Why do you think I've emphasized Sunday morning matters most? I mean, what's your? I'm just interested, I guess, in how you see this. I know why I say that about Sunday morning. I've talked about it a little bit, but why do you think that?
Well, as you mentioned, it's the one time where whole families will be together. What we're doing on Sunday morning specifically, we're having service, but then we're having small groups, life groups, and every age group has an opportunity for life group and to be discipled. And so if I can get a student on a Sunday night, if that's when they first show up, if I point them to a Sunday morning, they're likely to get connected to a class. They're going to grow, and then likely their family. If their family's not attending church, their family will grow. So it no longer is just about me and my ministry. Right. It becomes student ministry.
They become part of the church.
It's pointing people to the church as a whole. Yeah.
And as opposed to a parachurch, like instead of the student ministry being just a parachurch organization, which I'm not against parachurch organizations, but there is something powerful about the church. The Lord formed the church. And when we do, I mean, Sunday morning's the church, and then we have all the parts of the church to do all the other times, but it's the only shared experience that we have. So we had a guy get baptized, one of the students got baptized Sunday, who's like, is he like a senior or something?
He's a senior.
So I happened to see him, we won't say his name or anything, but I just happened to see him, he was at midweek worship. Well, he wasn't at midweek worship, he was coming up to do something with the worship ministry. Yeah. And I just saw him, and he got introduced to me, and I said, "Oh, you're the guy who got baptized Sunday." He said, "Yeah." And I talked to him about his family. He comes from a family that's not churched, and so I just got to, kind of connect with him a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, he heard the sermon. His family came and heard the sermon, and he's the little evangelist. Mm-hmm. Not little, but he's the evangelist in that family, sort of. And so Sunday morning, like they're not going to come, the family's not going to come Sunday night, but they did come Sunday morning for his baptism. And if they come back, they'll come back on a Sunday morning. Yep. So I'd love to reach the whole family. It'll be to his what a joy it'd be for him to see his family come to Christ, of course. So anyway.
Yeah. And what a blessing it is that not as a student, when a student comes on a Sunday night, they're not just at a Sunday night. Now this student is going to be serving in worship ministry, is using his gifts and his talents to serve in another part of the church. And that's what it's meant to be, is that we're all together. We're helping each other, growing together.
I'll just tell you, there's this crazy idea in the Bible that the church matters. And I say crazy because I think, I don't think that's how a lot of Christians even think about it. I think they think the church doesn't matter at all. Like Christ matters, but not the church. Yeah. I noticed you have this. You've got this beautiful shirt with your bride on your shirt. Yeah. She matters to you, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And the bride of Christ. I mean, Christ loves the church. He loves his bride, and so it's a crazy idea by American standards now, especially. I don't think the persecuted church thinks the same way as we do, but man, in our standards, it's crazy sound. The church, it doesn't matter at all. We say, yeah, it matters. And there's something beautiful about this imperfect organization. I mean, the organization, God made it perfectly, but it's filled with imperfect people. And I love it. That's good. I preach that theme a lot, don't I?
It needs to be preached more.
Well, I'm not sure I always communicate to everybody why things matter like they should, or align the vision as well as they ought to. Every once in a while, I think to do that, and I want to do that better. I want to help guys to see sort of the why behind what we do, and quite frankly, sometimes I need to change how I think and what we do. So I really need. This is a us thing. The church is an us thing. It's not it's certainly not a Doug thing. It's a Jesus thing, but then under that, it's us together. I think there's a lot of benefit. I mean, I don't want to abdicate my role. Sometimes every once in a while I got to say this, we need to do it this way, but I don't want to not listen or not learn or be unwilling to change.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some challenges in this student pastor, senior pastor relationship and how to address them. All right. So come on, Mariano, what do you think?
Yeah, I just I guess speaking to those that are youth pastors that are watching, I've heard some challenges. One is just they want a relationship with their lead pastor, and they don't feel like they have that relationship.
Let's talk about that some. So what do I do? Let's talk about what I do maybe not so well. What would you say? Oh man, Doug could do that better, or pastors as a whole could do that better. Anything that stand out to you?
Yeah, so I'm biased,
hard to say that right in front of the whole world. Yeah,
I'm biased, but what I think you've done with me the past couple of years well is that I feel like I can go and talk to you if I have a question. But on the other side, I think a lot of my youth pastor friends have to be willing to humble themselves enough to ask a question.
I see.
And I think so.
Like it'd be good if the senior pastor said, "Hey, let's talk about this."
Yeah.
But even if he doesn't, the student pastor can initiate that, right?
Yeah. So I think that you have two sides. You have a lead pastor, and maybe some lead pastors that are listening that we feel like my student pastor doesn't want that relationship with me. Maybe even assuming that. But then on the other side, you have student pastors that want it, but then they're not willing to build that relationship.
I'll bet there's some reasons why people feel like they don't. Like I bet there's a reason why pastors have this struggle, and I'm just going to speculate a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think maybe sometimes pastors don't always want to, they don't value that relationship or maybe initiate ministry with the student pastor. Sometimes it's because the student pastors leave so soon. They don't even know. I mean, let's face it. There's probably no position in church life that just has a greater turnover than student pastor area. And sometimes there's lots of reasons behind it, but some pastors are probably just, I don't know, they just assume this guy's only going to be here a couple years.
Sure.
I think probably some pastors feel threatened. Like that guy's going to start a church down the road or from me, or he's going to, I don't know, and they wonder if they can trust the guy. Like that would be a hard thing if you're not sure you can trust the guy. Either way, that relationship goes. Maybe they had some bad experiences. Like parents have complained about something. Parents get worked up about their kids, man. And
sure.
You think there's some other reasons that might happen, or how about from the student pastor's position? What is it that might keep him from, going to the? What keeps him on his side from having the relationship he ought to have with the?
Yeah, I mean, sinful areas maybe pride. Like you feel like you got it figured out and you don't need someone else to help. Maybe you feel like your lead pastor's too busy and you don't want to bother him. You may.
You bother me. Oh my goodness, I forgot to tell you that part.
Yeah, you might not be. You might not. So that pride, the biggest one I think of is pride, that you don't want to learn. Like you're not willing to learn.
So I tell you what, I have sometimes I'm like a know-it-all a little bit in my life. I can do that, and so I hate it in other people. The things that you hate in yourself, you really hate when you see it in someone else.
Yeah.
But man, when someone just doesn't want to learn, it's like really frustrating to me.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes when I was young, I didn't. When I was at my best, I was really open to learning, and when I was at my worst, I was like, I already know how to do this. And man, I look back at any times I thought that way, I'm really disappointed that I would think that way ever. Yeah. Because the more I know, the more I realize how much I don't know.
Sure.
That's
good.
So much I don't know.
Yeah.
It is really. So any of you student pastors who are kind of listening, maybe your pastor won't like maybe there are things about him that won't be perfect, like of course, and maybe there's some things that you won't do like he does. You don't think he sees it in the right way. I get it, but you can learn something from that guy,
even if you don't see something the same way.
Yeah.
And speaking of, so we've mentioned kind of the tensions or the reasons why we might struggle to have those relationships. But how about I want to give some advice to youth pastors, and you can give some advice to some lead pastors that are listening. And my advice to those that are listening that are youth pastors is the first thing is be faithful. I think what Pastor Doug said is true. The statistics here that we have say that 60% of youth pastors, which might be higher than that, leave their position within 2 years. I've heard 18 months a lot more often lately. Yeah.
I think it's getting longer. I do think it's slowly changing for the better, but yeah.
So if you're a youth pastor listening, God can call you. That like God does call us to leave sometimes, but would you make your primary focus to say, God's placed me here, how can I be faithful to where I'm at and serve the Lord, and maybe keep my eyes on serving the church I'm at instead of my eyes on the sunset or the gazing ahead to what's next. Be faithful where you're at. And the second thing for youth pastors that I would say is we have to humble ourselves constantly. I've mentioned this a few times in podcasts, but humbling yourself means personally humbling yourself, so being willing to learn, always learning, fighting its pride. But humbling yourself could also just be as simple as your relationship with your pastor. Go ask him a question, and you might already think he's going to have a different perspective than you, and he may have one, but ask him why he has that perspective and be willing to learn and see. Even if you still don't see eye to eye, you can at least understand the why to his ideology on that. And so be faithful and humble yourself.
All right. So this is too big a subject to stop. So we're going to come back on the next podcast and talk about it a little bit more. I'm going to say just one word before. I need some time to think to my advice to these to the senior pastors, because senior pastors, we can be a little thick. So I got to really think through how to get through the thickness of them,
Sure.
So I'll say something to student pastors though. It'd be really good for you to come into a new position, if you do, saying, I'm going to stay a while. I'm not going to leave the first problem that comes, or just I'm going to think a little bit longer term. And I think if you're thinking 5 years seems like an eternity when you're 30 years old, maybe. It seems like an eternity.
Yeah.
But let me just tell you, 5 years is not that long. And there are a lot of benefits in spending some time learning as you face whatever future it is. So I'm just saying, something to consider.
Yeah.
God, you follow God wherever he wants you to go, but sometimes some guys would really benefit by staying and making a longer process. And I think almost always the student ministry, not always, but almost always, it benefits by having some longevity.
Consistency,
yeah. There's some consistency. So we're going to come back to this subject. I'm here with my man Mariano, Pastor Mariano Sarabia. I'm Pastor Doug Munton, First Baptist Church, O'Fallon, Illinois. Hey, we'll be back with you. Hope you'll join us for the next edition of the Encouraging Faith podcast.
See you.